Democrats would love to make you believe they are the party of civility and order when it comes to electing a president. Fact of the matter is, there is just as much a revolt in the underbelly of the left than there is on the right. What makes the Republican battle so talk-worthy is they're tearing each other apart every day in front of the cameras and blathering cable and radio talkers. There is a quiet and growing revolt on the left regarding one group of people who can, at their personal discretion and without input from anybody else, change the election in a heartbeat. And wait for it, it's becoming a little more public every day. Our guest is a lecturer in the Department of Political Science at the University of Georgia who specializes in campaigns and elections and who can untangle the mess that is the super delegate. Welcome, Josh Putnam, to the Hard Line. Josh, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Super delegates, this entire conversation here suddenly seemed to crop up and hit everybody in the face because nobody thought about it. The super delegates themselves, how much actual power do they have?
Well, it's a good question, right? It's one of these things that came up 8 years ago during the primary battle on the Democratic side between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Out of the 4,700 plus delegates that the Democrats have this cycle, a little over 700 of them are these super delegates you mentioned. And again, if we go through a tightly contested nomination race this cycle between Sanders and Clinton, if that race keeps the delegate count within that 700 delegates, then and if presumably Clinton is behind in that, then the superdelegates could make the difference in that.
Let me get to the superdelegates themselves. Typically, Democratic governors, members of Congress, top state, national party leaders. How do you sway these people? And is there any historical precedence whatsoever to look at superdelegates and, like Bernie Sanders believes, that he can change their minds at the last minute?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you're in the Sanders camp right now, you're hoping that something similar to 2008 happens again. As was the case 8 years ago, Clinton has a lead in the superdelegate count. She had one heading into the primary season this year, while it was significantly greater this time around than it was 2008. But once 2008 proved to be a closely contested race, really things evolved in terms of a discussion about what constitutes the decision-making calculus for each of these people. On the one hand, as you mentioned before, the rules allow them to be independent arbiters, to choose the candidate that they like. But as 2008 went on, and hypothetically as 2016 might proceed, these folks may have something to think about moving forward, that they may want to, and some of them are elected officials, they may want to follow the will of their constituents. And that may change the pattern of endorsements we've seen among the superdelegates so far.
Well, there's currently 2 petition campaigns designed to go after the superdelegates and tell them to reflect the popular vote rather than the sentiment of party elites. And what I read you right there comes from Politico. That seems to be rather smart, if I'm going to just go ahead and say it out loud. Don't necessarily go with the elites, but go with the people and go with the popular votes as well. Why do these superdelegates always seem to stray from what the public wants?
It's not that they often stray from the public or what the public wants. It's just that the way things are now, early in this 2016 race, and the way they were throughout 2008, that things were close, and it gave this large group of delegates the ability to, if they voted as a bloc, to overturn potentially the will of the people. That didn't end up being the case in 2008, and we've certainly got a long way to go in 2016 before we see whether or not they're going to be relevant to the final delegate count for this cycle.
Is there any historical look at superdelegates changing their minds? Because Bernie Sanders believes, he actually says he's met with a few of them and is able to change their minds. But what does history tell us?
Well, again, we don't have a lot to go on here. The Democratic Party added superdelegates for the 1984 cycle, and between then and 2008, we didn't see any cycles where the superdelegates were decisive, and we didn't see it in 2008 either, for that matter. What we did see in 2008, as I mentioned, is a very closely contested race between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, where the superdelegates were relevant but didn't overturn the will of the people. What we did see during the course of 2008 was that some of those folks who weighed in behind Clinton early opted to change their minds and moved over and endorsed Obama as the rules allow them to do.
Do you think at this point that the superdelegate issue, are we making too much of it, or is it really something that we need to be talking about?
I mean, it's always worth talking about, but I think it's probably pretty early right now to know whether or not it's going to be a big deal later on in this. Now,
that's
we can
actually
get more contest into this.
I'm so glad you said that, because we look at things in the 24/7 news cycle. We sometimes have to look at things that don't necessarily mean a lot right now, unless, of course, you're Bernie Sanders and his people. Then it means just about everything right now. Josh Putnam, thanks for putting some sense into all this. We appreciate your time. Now, if you're waiting for Jeb and his family to start fighting, you get your wish. But can he overcome the critical nature of his brother's presidency? That and more when we continue on The Hard Line.